Good afternoon to you. Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com, here with your Hurricane Pro and HD video blog for August 19th, 2013. We'll start things off looking at sea surface temperatures. These are the actual sea surface temperatures, not your departures from normal or your anomalies. And this is the outline of where the 26 degrees Celsius isotherm is, or basically the 80-degree line across the Atlantic Basin. Everything south of that line is basically ready for hurricanes to form. There's one area out here near the Cape Verde Islands, just north of there, where water temperatures are just a little bit too cool for development. But especially the western basin here throughout the Caribbean, lots of warm water to work with. If we switch over to look at the anomalies, the departures from your average, still running a little bit above the long-term average throughout the deep tropics, starting to erode that just a little bit out in the far eastern Atlantic. The Caribbean and Gulf of Mexico running above average overall. But here in the Pacific, things are really running well below the normal levels that we see this time of year, part of that neutral to cold neutral pattern that we're seeing. In other words, there is no El Nino this year, no abnormal warming of the Pacific, and that, coupled with the warm Atlantic, should lead to a fairly active peak of the hurricane season. I know things are quiet now, but when they do change, it looks like we're going to have plenty of warm water to work with. This is the measure of the ocean heat content in the Atlantic Basin. As you can see, most of the higher heat content values in the western part of the basin, as you would expect. None of this has been disturbed by any tropical cyclones previous, and you have to take that into consideration. While things have been nice and quiet, that also means that the water has not been stirred up or mixed. And so any tropical cyclones that do come along, especially hurricanes, could potentially have plenty of warm water, and warm water that extends very deep. That's what ocean heat content is all about, to work with. So we'll see how this comes into play over the coming weeks. Speaking of coming weeks, this is the Madden-Julian Oscillation current and forecast map or graphic. Right now the MJO barely detectable, very weak, over in the western Pacific, about to enter the western hemisphere and eventually move its way across the Pacific and into the Atlantic Basin. And when we get into phases 2 and 3 here, research has shown that that time period is when the Atlantic Basin really becomes active. And one thing to point out, this little period right here is at the end of the MJO's forecast period going out to September the 2nd, just knocking on the door of phase 2. And that corresponds to the ramp up climatologically in the hurricane season. In other words, the Madden-Julian oscillation favoring upward motion in the Atlantic Basin, coinciding with the traditional peak of the hurricane season. So you kind of add more favorability on top of what normally would happen in any given year, and we should have a very busy September ahead. To point out where the MJO is right now, this is Japan. Here's the coast of China. Hawaii is way over here, and then you have the vast open Pacific in between, and here is where the Madden-Julian oscillation is most detectable right now, with some upward motion going on, helping to foster the development of some tropical activity in the western Pacific. Less of an MJO signature farther to the east, and once we get over to the western hemisphere, especially in the Atlantic Basin, very, very clear of any cloud cover to speak of, and this is part of the downward phase, or the sinking air, associated with the negative part of the MJO. The positive phase of it, when it's going to come through and light things off at the end of the month and towards the first part of September, if the model guidance is correct. And that model I showed you, the ECMWF, does a really good job at forecasting that out into the future. So we'll see. I believe it's just a matter of time. And in fact, another piece of evidence here, let's just say for the sake of argument that we're right here at August 20th, close enough at August 19th. Well, you see how the hurricane season progresses along, but then we have just this little bit of a leveling out in the ramp up right about this time of the year. And then right at the end of the month, around the 25th, 26th, 27th, somewhere in there, it's hard to put an exact date on it, but here's September 10th, the traditional peak. But right before that time, things really start to take off. We are just knocking on the door of that, and that's what I'm saying will be coincidental this ramping up that we're getting ready to see in the natural progression of things right through here will coincide with a favorable upward motion pulse with the Madden-Julian oscillation, that things should get very busy in September, and I certainly hope people are ready for that. Quiet this week, it looks like, but after this week we should see a marked increase in activity in the Atlantic Basin, and then September will probably be very, very busy. So we shall see, right? The forecast will be whatever the tropics want it to be, and at least we'll be able to verify and go back and see what was right and what was wrong. Have yourselves a great rest of your Monday and a great week ahead. Again, I am Mark Sudduth. HurricaneTrack.com is my website. Always an honor to do these videos for you on Hurricane Pro in HD. I'll be back tomorrow with more.